Hey guys, welcome back to Hectic HEMA, where we talk about everything HEMA related, and today we're going to be talking about the Red Dragon Combat Longsword. Okay guys, so let's get into it. The Red Dragon Combat Longsword, what is it? It is part of the Red Dragon Combat Steel line from what I've seen. And it makes up a group of swords, including a Viking sword and an arming sword, which are supposed to be used for both HEMA sparring and historical reenactment. We'll talk about the limitations of that later. What is it? Let's talk about the measurements first. So let's talk about how the sword is made. It is 107.5 centimetres long, 86 centimetres of that is blade, the rest is made up by guard, grip, pommel. The construction goes straight through, so steel, the blade itself, I should have said, is carbon spring steel. I can't tell you what type of spring steel it is. But it is spring steel, it is solid, and it returns to shape very easily. I've had no issues with it taking a bend or anything like that in it. Solid guard, hasn't taken anything but some nicks in the sparring. The construction of the handle is a wooden core with a leather wrap glued to it, textured leather glued to it. And we go through to a disc pommel, which is pinned at the end. Let's talk about the blade then. The blade, like I said, is 86 centimetres long, carbon spring steel with a 3mm edge on it. And I think therein lies some of the problems. But the 3mm edge, which allegedly makes it safe for reenactment. So what is this sword supposed to be used for? It was, I should say, advertised as a sword that was meant to be used, or capable of being used, I should say, for both HEMA sparring and for reenactment. Now, I won't talk about its uses as a reenactment weapon because I'm not a reenactor. I know nothing about it other than the fact it looks cool. I'm a HEMA student and practitioner. And I can't really talk to you about anything reenactment related other than the fact it looks good. So let's talk about how it performs as a HEMA weapon for training and whether it's worth your money. Let's start with the positives about it. Like I said, shipping and processing and all that from the night shop have been absolutely brilliant, and I can't fault them on anything to do with that. And it's a reasonable price. It was £140-ish, British pounds, as I said, and you get a decent amount of swords for that. I can't speak about it from a reenactment perspective, obviously, but it is a solidly built sword, and I've had no rattles with it after going at some angry sparring with it, and I've enjoyed drilling with it in the garden when I've done drills with it in the garden. The limitations start when I've used it at the club, and we'll go into that and break down each area I've had some issues with as I go through it. So let's talk about the obvious kind of thing, the elephant in the room, the fact it is quite a short blade, and I'll stick up a photo of this next to my mate Ollie's Siggy Standard feather, and you'll immediately see the size difference. Now, whilst size isn't everything, gentlemen will understand that it does contribute to something in sparring. And I've very much noticed the length difference when I was trying to find measure in sparring. The length of the blade put me at a disadvantage when I was sparring against my mate who was just using a Siggy Standard. I felt the difference in fret, really. I felt out of measure a lot of the time. It took me a long time to find the measure within which I could strike, and that's partly due to my technical skill, but also the fact I was using a shorter weapon against a longer weapon, which might not be necessarily advantageous for somebody just getting into HEMA if you're looking for a first weapon to use. So that's the first issue I found, the length of the blade. The next issue I found with the sword, and I think this comes down to the overall construction of it, is the fact it feels very, very heavy in the hand. Now it weighs in at 1.25 kilograms, so it's not heavy. It's not a heavy sword, but it feels heavy. Why? Because frankly, I think the pommel is just too small for the blade. It feels very, very end heavy. I don't think it's helped by this 3mm edge, almost all the way down. The ricasso here at the end is thicker. I think it's 4 point. Let me have a look. I'll check my notes. I think at the thickest point it's 4.3 millimeters, which would be at the ricasso. It feels very heavy in the hand. There's no kind of taper that goes down. It's just a standard 3mm edge, and the filler, though I'm sure it takes off some of the weight, the blade still feels very heavy. When you're trying to return to guard or position, it just feels heavy in the swing, especially if you're trying to use it one-handed. It could use a bigger pommel. Now, why do I say this? My instructor at the academy has a very, very similar size longsword in terms of length. It has a slightly bigger grip and a bigger pommel. That makes a world of difference, I've got to say. The bigger pommel in particular makes it feel far more nimble in the hand. And one of the issues I found with this, it just feels very heavy. And that just makes you feel much slower when you're sparring. Let's talk about the grip now in the handle construction. Where have I found it problematic? I've not had any issues with rattling. I've had no issues with anything coming loose. The sword is still solid. I've got no problems with it whatsoever in that respect. What I have had problems is just the leather peeling away. This is a type of leather. I can't tell you what kind of leather they've used on it, but it's a kind of textured leather that they've glued over the top of this wooden core. Again, I can't tell you what kind of wood they've used for the to go around the tang. But what we have is this kind of textured leather with 3 leather strips to add that extra kind of grip in the middle. How is that those additional 3 leather strips attached? They are thicker pieces of leather which have been wrapped around the handle and glued. And then they've glued this the actual leather wrap on top of it. Now the issue I've had with it is that very quickly after I started using it, and I'm talking with maybe 2-3 hours of training, I'd suggest, the black leather has started to peel away. It started to come loose. And that's got worse and worse as I've used it over the weeks and months. And I haven't used it in sparring with my heavy gloves, I should say, much. But the more I've used it with heavy gloves, the worse this kind of peeling's gotten. And these additional 3 leather strips in the middle of, started to become exposed, and they've started peeling away as well. Is that a massive issue? No. I can replace the wrap without too much hassle. Do I want to? Not particularly. But you know what? You pay some money, you take your pick, really. You pay £140 odd for this sword, and you don't expect all the fittings to be like premier quality, do you? It just is what it is. Let's talk about the edge. Like I said, it's 3mm, and I think part of the problems when using it in sparring come down to this 3mm edge. It just needs to be thick if you're going to use it for reenactment, as I understand it. What I was ever so slightly surprised about was the chipping and the damage it took in the sparring I've done with it, and I've used it for a sparring match, a more lengthy sparring match against a friend. We went at it, and it's taken some, against the feather, a Sikhi standard, it's taken quite a few dinks and nicks and stuff like that. Now, with some conversation, the edge might compress down and become kind of more dense over time. But I was surprised at the chipping that it took when I was using it in sparring against a feather, considering that this is, it's a chunkier blade. I'll take a file to it. I'll file it smooth like I will for anything else, if there are any nicks or burrs presenting or anything like that. But I was surprised at kind of what it was taking just off the feather, if that makes sense. The blade, which feels much lighter really, and is much thinner with a 2mm edge. But it is what it is. How it would hold up to reenactment, I really honestly couldn't tell you, but I was surprised at the kind of, and you can hear, I'm not sure if you can hear that, you know, there's some considerable little nicks in there which I can get my nail under. Is it a major issue? No, I'll take a file to it, but still I was surprised at it. Let's talk about a nice little addition you get with this with the sword, and that's the scabbard. And it is a scabbard. It has a wooden core to it. Don't ask me what type of wood it is. I could not tell you. And it has this kind of stainless steel cap on the end here. It's a nice little bit of it's a nice little addition. Is it like top quality? I'm sure it isn't, but does it look nice? Yes, it does. If you're looking at this as a kind of costume piece and not just like not a HEMA piece, it's a nice little addition. It's nice to have something to stick this into after I've cleaned it up and I put some oil on it afterwards, after using it for HEMA, and I know it's just tucked away nice and safe. I don't really need to worry about rust or anything like that. It's a nice little addition for when I'm carrying it around. Is it a brilliant scabbard? I'm sure it isn't in terms of other things, but no, it's 140 odd quid. I'm not expecting an Albion, if that makes sense. It's not designed to be like that. It's designed to be a workhorse. But if you were planning to wear this, I would just be aware of the fact that this doesn't keep the sword in by itself. It is loose. And I mean, it is loose. Lots of rattle, but also, watch, I'll just give you an example. You tip it the wrong way, it's going to come out no problem. There is absolutely nothing keeping it in there other than gravity and angle. But is it a nice little addition with a sword for 140 odd quid? Yes, it is. So yeah, it's a nice little addition for what it is. So let's talk about how it's handled in sparring for HEMA, because we buy a sword for HEMA and we want to use it for sparring, I'm sure. I asked permission. I asked permission of the people I sparred against, and I've had people say they didn't want to spar against this. One, because it is a chonky blade. It really is. With that 3mm edge, it looks intimidating. People just don't want to get hit by it, and that's fair enough. I have a good mate of mine at the academy called Ollie, and he was brave enough to volunteer as tribute to face Mr. Chonkalot here. What was the experience sparring with it on his part? I think the words he said were, "You know you're being hit by it," and I am sure that you do know when you've been hit by it, even with decent protection. And Ollie has, you know, decent HEMA gear, and he regularly does longsword sparring, so, you know, I trust his opinion. He's by no means like a piece of cotton candy, so to speak. He's not candy floss. Would I feel comfortable? One of the things I would feel uncomfortable with, and I've avoided doing, is thrusting with this. Now, is it spring steel? It is. Does it flex? It does. What is the flex on it? It is on the firm end of awful. I would not want to be on the receiving end of a thrust from this bad boy. It has a 3mm edge at the tip, but there's just no flex in this realistically. You know, you hit somebody with this, they're really going to know about it. Like, I'm putting some pressure on my hand here, there is like zero flex at that point, and it's uncomfortable on the hand. Like, I'm leaving a nice indent on my hand there, and it's not flexing. I wouldn't use this in the thrust. I've avoided using it in the thrust because I want to keep my friends at my club. It is something that if I use again in sparring, and I said if I use it again in sparring because frankly I'll probably just keep using a ciggy or something like that, a feather, for sparring. it's not something I would recommend to a beginner to use, and I don't think anybody's going to particularly enjoy sparring with you if you have this sword, in all honesty. I like the idea of it, and I very much like the price range of it, but if there was a second batch to come out and they were to make it, something with considerably more flex would be nice. But I don't know how they'd work that between you having a reenactment weapon and a HEMA weapon as well. Let's talk about how it performs in sparring then. Am I in love with it as a sparring weapon? No. And it really hurts me to say this because I really wanted to present a really well priced weapon which could be used for a beginner in HEMA. It's heavy. It feels heavy. The balance isn't great. You feel the blade length deficiency when you're sparring against feathers, or especially longer feathers. And one of the big issues I've had, really, and consider the fact I'm 5'6" and I'm a hobbit, so I'm Frodo Baggins sized, and this sword can just about be used comfortably without gloves by me when I'm training. So I don't have like trash can lid hands or plate hands. I've got medium-sized glove hands on the charitable side, and I can just about grip this properly by palming the pommel. This becomes really difficult when I'm using heavy gloves. When I'm using my Destroyer mods, Hands of Glory, I can just about grip this weapon two-handed, and guards on the right-hand side of my body, like the window guard, are just forget about it. Yeah, it's not going to happen. Left-hand side, just about. I can do high guards and, long guards and close guards, short guards. I can do things like that with Fiore, but, posta breve, posta lunga. I can do those, Porta di Ferro. I can do things like that, but the more complex guards which require me to cross my hands, they're not going to happen. And I really do feel that difficulty and that kind of the gloves getting in the way with movement on such a small grip. I really do. For you bigger guys, I think that's really going to be an issue, and you're not going to find that it a comfortable experience, I'll be honest. So let's sum this up. What do I think about it? It is a decent amount of sword, and I've enjoyed it. It's a fun little sword to use in the garden and drill and things like that. Or if I'm drilling, I could use this quite happily. But is it a good all-round first HEMA longsword? I don't think it is. I'll be honest. I can't comment on it again. I'll say it again as a reenactment weapon. But as a HEMA longsword, is it great? No, I don't think it is. Why? Because as a beginner weapon, you want something that you can use, 1 for drilling and 2 for sparring. And the deficiencies are really felt in sparring. They really are. It just doesn't lend itself well to sparring. It's not fun to spar with. It's definitely not fun to spar against, according to my friends. And bear in mind, I've had people who didn't want to spar against this. I would suggest save your pennies and your pounds and your dollars and buy something else. There are some additional things that I've noticed with the sword. It is no longer for sale online. Or I haven't been able to find it online. Shortly after I purchased this weapon, I was looking online because I was tempted to take a look at the arming sword, and I noticed that there was a heavy discount applied to it. I think Red Dragon had applied, the night shop had applied at least like a 10% discount on top of the weapon itself. So you could pick up the arming sword for around about £100, I think, and you still can if they still got them in stock. But the longsword is no longer available. Now, why was the reason for the discount? Well, and it hasn't happened to this sword, I have to say that, but some of the stock, allegedly, they noticed that the grips had shrunk in transit somehow, which caused a gap between the guard and the grip, or the pommel and the grip, which obviously left room for all sorts of problems with the sword. And don't get me wrong, it's not a massive problem. You know, I was tempted to buy the arming sword and just sort out the grip myself, because then I'd have an arming sword for £100, which is a really kind of reasonable kind of price to have an arming sword for. But I'd still be faced with the issues, I think, of the 3mm edge, and I don't know how they'd handle weight-wise. I can't comment on it, but I wonder if that's the reason that they've taken it off the shelves, or they haven't, you know, got any more of this stock through. It could be that being, I think it's a new item, because I saw some guys on the HEMA Facebook community commenting and asking if anybody had used these before, and nobody seemed to have done that. I'm wondering if they're going to make a second run, like, you know, version 2.0 of this sword, which would be interesting to see what it's like. What would I like to see for a second version of this longsword? I don't know if it would be possible, really, within the price range. Something with maybe a bigger pommel, so it feels slightly livelier, a little bit more nimble in my hand, maybe something slightly longer. Something with a smaller edge, maybe a 2mm edge, something specifically aimed at HEMA would be really, really cool. Those would be kind of my improvements on it. A bigger grip. Yeah, it is what it is. So closing thoughts. Would I recommend this as a HEMA starting weapon? No, I wouldn't. And that's nothing against Night Shop or Red Dragon. I love their products. I've loved shopping with them in the past. But I think honestly, if you're looking for a first longsword, save your money, save your pennies, get yourself a feather of some description, something that you can comfortably use in sparring and is going to measure up in terms of length and everything else in a HEMA situation. Again, I can't comment on the reenactment side. So guys, I hope this has been useful. Please comment in the comment section about, you know, if you've used this sword yourself, what you think about it. Comment what feather you would recommend for a longsword enthusiast starting out in HEMA, because it's always good to have those kind of recommendations under videos. Again, like, subscribe, help support the channel, help it grow. It helps us bring you more content, and we'll be back with more tips, tricks, reviews on more items which we've bought and we've tested, and some more combat content. And until then, keep training, stay safe, and we'll see you next time.